you, Jackson. Kia ora tātou, vanakkam, aiboan, and wonderful to be able to join you tonight. And Jax was right, they let us out for an hour every day when we're in Parliament, and so there's nowhere else I'd rather be than here with you. But it is a special evening in Parliament tonight. We've literally, within the last 15 minutes, just passed a bill that's all about workers' rights. It's a fair pay agreement. It is a really historic day for our party, but it's also a really historic day for all our hard-working Kiwis who are out there. So please do go back and watch that debate. I also just wanted to acknowledge my brother in the house, Ibrahim Omar, who I'm sure many of you know very well and who wanted to be here tonight, but unfortunately he's not feeling well. But he and I have been very much engaged in asylum seeker and refugee advocacy in the House. For me, whenever I walk into a room like this, I sort of feel the wairoa of the place, because I think you're coming to speak to people who very much share your values. But I also suspect that it's a room full of many stories. So perhaps I'll share with you mine and then talk about some of the issues we've been advocating on. We came to Aotearoa from Sri Lanka via Zambia in 1987. And when I was 12 years old, my mother told me a story which profoundly changed the direction of my life. She told me about Richard de Souza, who was a journalist in Sri Lanka and very vocal about the government in the 1980s because he believed that they were committing a lot of human rights abuses in Sri Lanka. He knew he was being targeted by the government of the day, and because of that arranged to get a job with Reuters overseas. My mother told me the night before he was due to leave overseas, he was picked up by the secret police and his body was found the next day washed up on a beach. She then told me that his mother moved to London and became a really strong Amnesty International activist. And I had no idea what Amnesty International was or what it did, but I found out as a 12-year-old and it horrified me, not just finding out about what was happening in Sri Lanka, but all across the world in terms of human rights violations. And from there I went on to join school groups, the New Zealand board and then the international board, and essentially made it my career. So I've been a lawyer, I've been in policy and management, but every role I've held, whether it's been with the Auckland Refugee Council or Amnesty or Greenpeace or community law or the Children's Commission, has had a strong human rights thread in it. And that's very much how I see my role in the House. Whatever it is we're doing in the House, in my view, and I know in Ibrahim's too, is about bringing a human rights lens to our work. So you can be assured that you have that advocacy within the House. I do also want to acknowledge that the advocacy and the activism in this room, in my view, there's a trajectory to what we're doing in the refugee and asylum seeker space, and it has its roots in advocacy from people. I suspect many of you were involved in the campaign about doubling the quota. Yeah, we don't have Murdoch the spearhead here, but I felt that as a student and then as a young lawyer as well in my early days. And that activism is really the roots of policy change, so please don't stop doing that. But we've seen a continuation of that, in my view, with the Labour leadership. We saw a continuation when we responded to the Amnesty International report and asked for an inquiry into the imprisonment of asylum seekers. And we saw that when the government said that it accepted the findings of the Victoria Casey report as well. There's a quote I've always loved by T.S. Eliot when he talked about the still point in a turning world where past and future gather. And for me, over the last few years, as we've struggled to respond to the challenges of COVID, that's where we've been. We've been in this strange point where we've had to look squarely at where we've come from, who we are, what we want to prioritise and how we're going to move forward. And in the space of protecting people and valuing people, I think we've responded with our hearts. In terms of Afghanistan, we've looked at creative ways of how we can bring people in the most traumatic of circumstances to New Zealand, not using the refugee quota, but using critical purpose visas, creating these new things to respond in crisis. Minister Twyford has issued more than 100 visas to human rights defenders, women judges, women activists, LGBTQI activists, those people who are most at risk. And it's not a law, it's because we're responding with our hearts as well as with our heads. We've done the same in Ukraine, and I think that's something to be hugely proud of. But, and I think there are also huge challenges that stand ahead of us. I think one of the biggest things for me to get my head around is the fact that New Zealand is small. We're never going to be the Canada or the UK or the Australia. We're never going to take hundreds of thousands of people. And I've just been in Rwanda with Ibrahim, speaking to these countries who have these huge quotas. If that's not us, then what is the role that we fulfill next as we look to develop refugee and asylum seeker law, policy, response? I think it's a few things. There's a sense internationally that there is a retreat in trust in multilateral institutions. No one trusts the UN anymore because it doesn't respond. There's a sense that the 1948 UN Charter is an artefact, that it was built for a world that we're no longer in, that we have new challenges now. I believe in multilateralism. I believe very strongly in it. However, I do think there's a need to evolve the Refugee Convention and the way in which we respond to refugee and asylum seeker laws to respond to the real issues today. So what does that mean? It means looking at things like human rights defenders and how we ensure that they feel safe, how we give safe passage to those who are travelling between countries to access then a quota. It means looking at our own laws and ensuring that we have services that are fit for purpose for the diverse communities who are coming to Aotearoa. And I very closely read and reread the Asylum Seekers Trust report on ensuring that we're providing services to our asylum seeker community in line with the services that we're providing to our refugee community as well. So there is a lot to do. You all know that. But I do think that where we've come now is to a place where we've got a government who've demonstrated that we understand that. And I think we've now got a history of responding and working together to address need. So as we look to the future for us, hopefully for a next term, the big challenge for those of us in the House who are very focused on this area is how we can work together to make sure we're actively taking those next steps. So again, I don't know if we're doing questions and answers tonight, or if it's just me talking. But I will be here for the next half an hour until I need to run back into the House. But please do feel that you have us as your voice, and that you can be real with us, that we trust you to tell us when we're getting it wrong or when we haven't quite reached where we need to be as well. So I might be here briefly tonight, but I intend to be available, as Jax will know. Jax has my number, so but a pleasure to be with you all here tonight, and thank you very much for the work you all do. Kia ora tātou.